Hi, and welcome to the session on reintroducing logic to your legal research and writing classroom. My name is Jessica Lefort, and I teach legal practice at the University of Michigan.
My name is Jesse Kirchner, and I teach first-year legal skills at Michigan State University College of Law.
And together we are the team of rivals. We are going to take this presentation in two chunks. First, I'm going to present an exercise on fallacies.
And then I'm going to talk a little bit about partial syllogisms and how to address the problems that they create.
So let's get started.
So, as I said at the top of this presentation, what we're going to do today is to give you some plug-and-play lessons to help you reintroduce logic into your 1L classroom. The goal of these exercises or lessons is to make them easily integratable and to provide you all the tools you need to incorporate them. We also want to provide you with one or more windows in which you could put these exercises or lessons in, plug them right into your class. The exercise I'm going to discuss today is about introducing fallacies. I like to start with this exercise because it doesn't require a deep integration introduction into. So as I said, what we're going to do is to give you a couple of plug-and-play lessons that you can use to reintroduce logic into your 1L legal research and writing classroom. The goal of these lessons is to make them easily integratable and to provide you all the tools to easily incorporate them with minimal effort on your part. We also want to give you a couple of different options for when you could put them into your classroom so that you can be flexible. My exercise involves introducing fallacies to your students. I like this exercise because it doesn't require a deep understanding of formal logic on your part or your students' parts. I like to incorporate this exercise either in the fall during the introduction or revisitation to the CREAC structure because it is a great way of showing students issues that come up between using their explanation cases and their application sections. You could also use this in your spring semester when you're introducing persuasive writing. How this exercise works is there's a before-class component, an in-class exercise, and an after-class component. Depending on whether your in-class exercise is actually taking place in class or is being flipped to be asynchronous, the after-exercise component can then be either in class or after class. But first I want to begin with a quick logical syllogism refresher. Now I said that this exercise does not require, a knowledge of formal logic or the logical syllogism. I want to give you this refresher, however, because I find it to be helpful to explain to you why I like to start with the kinds of fallacies that I start with. So here's the quintessential logical syllogism. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. All humans are mortal is the major premise, the sort of universal truth. Socrates as a human is a minor premise. It is the factual assertion, and Socrates is mortal is the conclusion that you can draw from these premises. If we were to diagram this with letters, it would be all A is B, C is A, therefore C is B. If you want to look at this visually, B is the mortal, right? All of the things that are mortal. A is the category of humans, all of which are inside the mortal category. And C is Socrates, who is inside the human category and is therefore also inside the mortal category. Now there are two types of fallacies. The first type are formal fallacies. These are defects in the form of the argument, so the structure of the relationship between the A's and the B's and the C's. Here's an example. All reptiles have scales. A fish has scales. A fish is therefore a reptile. If we were to diagram this, it would look like this. B is the circle of things that have scales, and A is the circle of things that are reptiles, all of which fall in the category of scales. Then we have C, which is a fish, which falls in the category of things that have scales, but does not fall in the category of reptiles. The other kind of fallacy are informal fallacies. These are defects in the content of the argument. They may or may not result in a formal defect, and this is why you don't need to have a deep understanding of formal logic to understand informal fallacies. A good example here is, a star is a giant ball of gas, Kim Kardashian is a star, therefore Kim Kardashian is a giant ball of gas. You understand automatically that this argument is fallacious, but you don't need a deep understanding of the form of logic in order to figure out why. This is why I like to start with informal fallacies when I'm introducing fallacies to my students. So here's a little overview of the exercise. Before class, I have my students review an informal fallacy handout with 6 categories of fallacies, their definitions, and a few examples of each. Then in class, we play a game, either individually or as in teams or groups, which can be retooled as an asynchronous embedded video quiz, in which students review a short video clip and then answer a multiple choice question as to which fallacy arose in that video clip. After class, I like to have my students respond to a discussion board post where they get to bring in real life examples of the fallacies that we've discussed. If you were to do the in-class exercise asynchronously, you could use this time for a class debrief on that exercise. The informal fallacies that I put on my handout are the following ones: false cause, equivocation, false dilemma, red herring, slippery slope, and faulty analogy. I use these fallacies because they're common ones that students often see even if they can't name them. They're also easy to identify after the students have learned what they are and how to name them. And frankly, they're the easiest ones that I was able to find video clips on. At the bottom of this slide, there is a link to the Google document that is this handout if you want to make a copy of it and use it in your exercise. So here's an example of one of the questions on my in-class exercise. Here I'm using a DirecTV commercial. I'll play that for you now.
When you wait forever for the cable guy, you get bored. When you get bored, you start staring out windows. When you start staring out windows, you see things you shouldn't see. When you see things you shouldn't see, you need to vanish. When you need to vanish, you fake your own death. When you fake your own death, you dye your eyebrows. And when you dye your eyebrows, you attend your own funeral as a guy named Phil Shifley. Don't attend your own funeral as a guy named Phil Shifley. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV.
So after watching that commercial, the question for my students is this a false dilemma, a red herring, or a slippery slope? If you answer slippery slope, you are correct. You cannot link a second event without a direct cause from the first. In this example, you cannot link attending your own funeral with the fact that you're sitting around waiting for the cable guy. Now I'd like to provide you with the tools for this in-class exercise. As I said earlier, our goal is here to make this as easy for you as possible with the least amount of effort on your part. So here are the links to all the videos I use and connections with each one of the fallacies that they relate to. On this side, I'm providing you with links to polling and quiz options for you. Both either can be used depending on whether you're having an in-class exercise or you're going to be doing this asynchronously. For example, Mentimeter can be used both for in-class quizzes or embedded asynchronous quizzes into a presentation. Finally, I just wanted to give you a supplemental scaffolding exercise that you could use to layer on top of this one. So we talked about the 2 kinds of fallacies, informal and formal. This scaffolding exercise is about formal fallacies. So it would require at least a brief understanding, a basic understanding of a logical syllogistic structure. The formal fallacy's undistributed middle is just like the fish reptile scale example that I gave you previously, a situation where all A is B and all C is also B, and the conclusion that gets drawn then is all C are also A, and we know that that doesn't necessarily hold. The example for this exercise, and I do not take any credit for it, but it is a great one, is the witch's trial from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There, if you recall, a group of villagers wanted to bring a witch to burn in the village square. They had to determine that she was actually a witch before they would be allowed to burn her. So in order to do that, they figured out that witches are made of wood, and if witches are made of wood, that means they float, because things that are made of wood float. Ducks also float. So therefore, if she weighs as much as a duck weighs, she is made of wood and therefore a witch. That's a condensed version of this reasoning that they go through in the movie. And in fact, there's actually 3 good undistributed middle fallacies that happen in that segment of the film. The teaching guide for this exercise is also linked on this page for your assistance. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jesse, who is going to go through another lesson for you.
Thank you, Jessica. My name is Jesse Kirchner. I teach first-year legal skills as an adjunct professor at MSU College of Law. Today I'm going to talk about partial syllogisms. I'm going to start with what they are. Then I'm going to talk about what's wrong with partial syllogisms and how to remedy them. The information in this presentation would be appropriate for students who have a basic understanding of syllogisms and deduction. What is a partial syllogism? When I use the term partial syllogism, I mean a syllogism that's lacking one of its three statements. I'm going to focus on syllogisms that are missing a premise. The fancy word for this kind of syllogism is an enthymeme, a word given to us by Aristotle. So if we take our handy-dandy Socrates syllogism and omit the minor premise, we get all humans are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Or we can omit the major premise to yield Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Neither of these omissions bothers us because each one is so well understood. It's common understanding that all humans are mortal, and it's also common understanding that Socrates is a human. So if you're on the same wavelength with your audience, there's nothing wrong with leaving out commonly understood premises. Leaving them out might even serve rhetorical purposes, like you avoid boring your audience with information the audience already knows, and it allows you to emphasize the premise that you are expressing. But in written legal analysis, a partial syllogism can be a problem. Your audience expects to see your reasoning spelled out. Leaving out a premise risks annoying or even antagonizing your reader. And this is all the more so for first-year legal writers, for whom the act of legal writing is not just an act of communication, but it's also an act of demonstration. It's how they show the professor, it's how they show us what they know and what they understand about how to communicate a legal analysis. Let's look at an example. Because our client testified that he was afraid to try to leave his boss's office, a jury could conclude that he'd been falsely imprisoned. This isn't a bad sentence, but it's lacking a rule. It doesn't stand alone to communicate the conclusion. If that rule isn't in the vicinity of this sentence, the sentence risks making the reader do too much inferential work. But by adding this sentence at the beginning, we get a complete syllogism. As Dupler shows, a plaintiff's testimony can establish fear of leaving. Because our client testified that he was afraid to try to leave his boss's office, a jury could conclude that he'd been falsely imprisoned. Let's look at another example. Here, I've omitted the minor premise, so we have a major premise leading directly to a conclusion. Evidence of a plaintiff's fear to leave a room supports a defendant's liability for false imprisonment. So a jury could conclude that our client was falsely imprisoned. We can infer the missing fact, and it's common for students to think that we can infer that. For example, the student has already written this fact in the statement of facts, assuming this comes from a memo, and the student might figure that as long as the reader has learned all the facts in the statement of facts, they don't need to be restated. It's important to communicate to the student that the facts should be restated in the analysis. The material facts are important to restate. So what fact should be stated here? This fact. So we give the rule about the evidence of a plaintiff's fear, and then we say that the client testified that he was afraid to leave the room. This completes the syllogism. I've prepared a handout on partial syllogisms, which contains excerpts from 3 different cases that talk about parties' use of partial syllogisms. These excerpts in the court discussions could form the basis for exercises where students are asked to identify the missing premise and to learn about the consequences of omitting premises from an argument. I want to talk about one more thing before I'm done, the conclusory statement. A conclusory statement is a special kind of partial syllogism. It's a syllogism where both premises are unstated, leaving just a conclusion. While a syllogism lacking one premise can be annoying, a syllogism lacking both premises can be frustrating and confusing. Consider this example related to the ones that we looked at before. Our client was afraid to leave his boss's office. One problem with a statement like this is that it takes the form of a minor premise or a conclusion. It's hard to tell which one it is. Either way, the cure is to explain the source of the statement. If it's a minor premise, then cite to the record to show where the client said that he was afraid to leave. If it's your conclusion, explain that conclusion in terms of a major premise and a minor premise. If you have any questions about informal fallacies or about partial syllogisms, please feel free to reach out to us with questions.